If Max hadn't knocked that photo off the wall, I never would have known someone had been living inside my house. That's the first sentence I blurted out when the sheriff asked why I was crying so hard. And even as I said it, part of me still couldn't believe it. Max is my Labrador. He's big, friendly, and not exactly the stealthiest dog in the world, but he's sharp in his own way. Always sniffing out squirrels, staring at nothing in particular like he hears something I don't, or pawing at spots on the wall like they're calling to him. It used to seem quirky. Now it makes my stomach tighten. The morning it all started was just like any other. I'd brewed a pot of coffee, slipped on my worn flannel shirt, and fed Max his usual scoop of kibble. We were living alone now, just the two of us, ever since Dad passed 6 months ago. The house felt quieter than usual. Too quiet. I sat down in the den, that room filled with family pictures and old books. My eyes lingered on the photo above the fireplace. A family picture from Christmas, years ago. Everyone was there. Me, Mom, Dad, my brother Dean, and Max, who was just a floppy-eared pup at the time. Max stared at that picture a lot. I'd caught him before, just sitting on his haunches and looking up at it like it meant something, but that morning he started doing more than stare. He walked right up to the wall, stood on his hind legs, and started pawing at the frame. Softly at first, then more aggressively. "Max! Hey, cut it out!" I said, walking over to him. But he didn't stop. He scratched until the frame shook loose, clattered to the floor, and the back popped off. I picked up the frame and froze. There was something wedged between the photo and the cardboard backing, a folded-up piece of yellowing notebook paper. I unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was rushed, shaky, but I recognized it. It was my dad's. "If you're reading this, it means you found the only safe place I could think of. I don't know who's listening, but someone is. This house, it's not what it seems." I sat down right there on the rug. My heart was hammering. Max came over and nudged my arm with his nose. There were more words, paranoid ones, some might say. Warnings about sounds in the attic, tools going missing, things out of place. My dad hadn't said a word about any of this before he died. He had always been so level-headed, practical. But this letter read like someone who was scared. I tucked the letter into my shirt pocket and picked up the photo frame again. Behind where it had been hanging was something else. Faint scratches in the paint, like someone had tried to remove it before. My skin prickled. I tried to shrug it off, told myself maybe Dad was just old and confused. He'd been on medication toward the end. But the next night, Max started pacing in the hallway. He growled low in his throat, ears up, eyes locked on the ceiling. That same ceiling above the hallway closet. I opened the closet, dragged out the stepladder, and popped the attic hatch. Max barked once, sharp and loud. I climbed up, flashlight in one hand. The smell hit me first. Dust. Dry rot. But something else, too. Something like old food. There were footprints in the dust. Not mine, not Dad's. Bare, small ones. Someone had been up there. Recently. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I called the sheriff's office. They came, looked around, said there was no sign of forced entry. Said it was probably raccoons. But I knew better. Max knew better. That evening, Max wouldn't stop pawing at the wall behind the fireplace. I told him no, told him to go lay down, but he whimpered and kept pawing. So I knelt down and tapped the wood. Hollow. I found my old crowbar in the garage. Carefully, I pried away one of the wood panels behind the fireplace. There was an opening behind it, a narrow crawl space that ran alongside the foundation. Inside was a thin mattress, some food wrappers, and a flashlight. Max started barking like crazy. That was when I called the sheriff again. This time they brought more men. They took everything out, dusted for prints, questioned me again and again. They never said who it was, never caught whoever had been hiding there. But I moved Max's bed to the hallway after that. He slept lighter than I did. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about the letter, about what my dad had tried to warn me about. Maybe he'd known someone was there and just didn't know what to do. Maybe he thought no one would believe him. Max didn't stop checking the walls. Every day he'd sniff the corners, paw at places like he was double-checking. It made me nervous, but also grateful. I was safer because of him. One morning, about a week later, Max scratched at another photo. This one was near the stairwell, an old snapshot of Mom in the garden. There was nothing behind that one. No notes, no secret letters. But a few nights later, the power went out. I was lighting candles when I heard it. A noise upstairs. A creak. Then another. Max bolted for the stairs, barking furiously. I followed, heart racing. At the top of the stairs, I saw the attic door hanging open. I didn't go up that time. I waited for the sheriff. Again. They searched. Again, found nothing. I installed cameras, got motion sensors, everything. But nothing ever caught a face. Nothing ever recorded movement. Just sounds, creaks, scratches, breathing. Max would still go to the fireplace sometimes and sniff. He'd stare at the photo that started it all like he was waiting for something. I think he missed Dad, in his own way. That's how the first chapter of all this ends. With a mystery, a brave dog, and a very old house that still creaks too much in the night. And with me, now sleeping with a flashlight under my pillow, and Max curled right beside my bed. Because whatever was behind those walls wasn't gone. Not yet. The next strange thing started with the refrigerator. I heard it clunk in the middle of the night. Not the hum it usually made, or the slight rattle when the ice maker kicked on, but a loud clunk, like something had been slammed against it. Max heard it too. He shot up from the foot of my bed and took off down the hall before I could even grab the flashlight. By the time I caught up to him in the kitchen, he was growling low, staring at the refrigerator door like it had personally offended him. I flipped on the lights. Nothing. The kitchen looked fine. I opened the fridge. Milk, leftovers, condiments, same as always. But Max kept sniffing around the floor in front of it, then over to the counter, then the hallway leading to the laundry room. I didn't sleep after that. I made coffee at 4 a.m. and sat on the porch with Max curled up next to me. The wind had picked up, carrying the faint smell of pine. The stars were bright that night. I tried to focus on them instead of the way my nerves felt shot through. The next day I got to work late. I help run the local hardware store, which mostly means I keep the inventory stocked and listen to retirees complain about the price of nails. Frank, my boss, noticed right away something was off. "You look like someone hit you with a rake. You okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just didn't sleep. Max was acting up." Frank raised an eyebrow. "That dog senses ghosts, I swear. Remember when he barked his head off for 2 days straight and your water heater exploded?" "Don't remind me." I thought about telling him the whole thing. About the attic, the letter, the food wrappers behind the fireplace. But how do you say something like that without sounding out of your mind? And even if he believed me, what could he do? So I kept quiet and focused on restocking nails. When I got home, Max was sitting in front of the fireplace again. He wasn't scratching, not this time, just sitting there, perfectly still, eyes fixed on the family photo like it might speak to him. I knelt beside him and ran a hand over his head. "What are you looking for, boy, huh? You trying to tell me something?" His ears perked up, and he looked at me, then back at the wall. I stood up, touched the frame. It was firmly back in place. I had rehung it with a new hook after the last time. But then I noticed something strange. The paint behind the photo had darkened slightly, like it had been damp at some point. And the wood paneling just below it looked newer, like it didn't quite match the rest. Curious, I fetched the flashlight again and tapped around the frame. Then I dropped to the floor and examined the baseboards. Max lay down beside me, alert. The panel directly beneath the frame gave a different echo, like it wasn't backed by anything solid. I knocked once more. Hollow. I got the crowbar. I was more careful this time, easing the tool into the gap where the board met the floor. Slowly, I pried it loose. Behind it was more empty space, a small compartment. This one didn't lead anywhere. It was just a cavity in the wall. Inside it, I found a small box. It was a wooden cigar box, the kind Dad used to collect. I pulled it out, sat cross-legged on the floor, and opened it. There were 4 things inside: a key, a faded photograph, a folded piece of paper, and a metal tag. The key was small, old-fashioned, like it belonged to a diary or a lockbox. The photograph was black and white, grainy, showing 2 boys standing in front of this very house. One of them looked like my dad as a teenager. The other I didn't recognize. The folded paper had a single sentence: "He never left." The metal tag was the kind you'd see on a pet's collar, but rusted and illegible. I sat there for a long time, turning each item over in my hands. Max sniffed at the tag and sneezed. Something about it didn't sit right with me. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the picture. Who was the other boy? I dug through my dad's things, looking for any sign of him. Old letters, yearbooks, anything. But there was nothing. It was like the other boy never existed. I couldn't let it go. The next day, I drove to the county records office. I pulled up everything I could on the house. It had been in our family for a long time, going back to my great-grandfather. Most of the records were dry: deed transfers, tax assessments, but one thing stood out. In the 1970s, there was a report filed with the sheriff's department. A missing person, Russell Hayes, age 14, last seen near the woods behind the property. The report mentioned he'd been staying with family friends for the summer. Their name was the same as ours. I showed the photo to the clerk. "Does this look like the missing boy?" She took a long look. "Could be. Hard to tell. That was decades ago." I drove home in silence. Max met me at the door. He looked anxious, tail low, pacing the entryway. I stepped inside and stopped cold. The attic door was open again. I backed out, grabbed my phone, and called the sheriff. Again. This time, Deputy Sloan came. He was young, polite, and clearly didn't believe a word I was saying. But he climbed up there, took a look, and came back down with a frown. "There's food wrappers up there again," he said. "Empty water bottles. Someone's been staying there. You keep your doors locked?" "Always." "Could be someone with a key. Might have lived here once. Maybe they think they still do." I told him about the key I found in the wall, showed him the box. He took some pictures and said they'd do a sweep of the property that night. I didn't get much comfort from it. That evening I stayed in the living room with Max. We kept the lights on. I couldn't sit still, so I kept pacing. Around 10, Max started growling. This time he didn't look up at the attic. He was staring at the basement door. I swallowed hard. The basement was half finished, mostly used for storage. I'd barely gone down there since Dad died. I opened the door, flicked on the light, and took the stairs one at a time. Max stayed behind, watching from the top step. Nothing looked out of place. Cardboard boxes, tools, paint cans. But the smell, that same smell from the attic. stale food, sweat. And then I saw it. In the corner, just behind an old armoire, a sleeping bag, rolled up, and next to it, a shoe, child-sized. I turned slowly, heart racing. The window at the far end was unlatched. Whoever had been down there had just left. I ran back upstairs, locked every door and window, and called the sheriff again. They took it more seriously this time. Left an officer outside the house overnight. I sat in the den with Max all night, the photo still hanging on the wall like it was holding in the last secret. In the morning, Max pawed at it again. I pulled it down, just in case. There was nothing new behind it. But I stared at the image of our family, and the thought came like a whisper. Someone else had once been here. Someone Dad hadn't talked about. Max started barking again. This time he ran to the laundry room. I followed and found him scratching furiously at the dryer. I opened it. Inside was a small bundle of clothes, child-sized, old, covered in dust. And tucked into the pocket of one jacket was a small metal toy car. The initials RH were carved into the side. Russell Hayes. My skin went cold. I didn't understand what any of it meant yet. But I knew one thing for sure. Max wasn't barking at nothing. He was trying to help me finish a story that had never been told. And whatever that story was, it was buried deep in these walls. Waiting. Just waiting. The sun was barely up when I drove back to the records office. I hadn't planned on returning so soon, but that toy car in the dryer had rattled something loose in my head. I kept seeing those initials, RH, over and over again. Russell Hayes. The name was like a thread I couldn't stop pulling, and I had a feeling it led somewhere deeper than anyone had bothered to look. Max sat in the passenger seat, head out the window. He didn't usually like car rides unless we were going to the park, but today he was alert, focused, like he knew this was bigger than fetch or squirrels. Inside the office, the same clerk from before gave me a puzzled look. "You're back already? I need to see everything you've got on the Hayes family. Any known relatives, guardians, people they stayed with?" She clicked around her screen, frowning. "There's not much," she said. "They were renters, no ownership records. The kid went missing in '74, and there wasn't much of a follow-up. No body, no sightings. The parents moved away a year later." "Anything about a William Hayes? Or William Tucker? That's my dad's name." She hesitated, then tapped on something. "Well, that's odd. There's a document here. Guardianship transfer from the Hayes to a William Tucker. Summer of 1974. It says temporary for 2 months. Then there's nothing. No closure report. That's the year Russell disappeared." "Yep." My stomach turned. My dad had never said a word about any of this. Never mentioned being a guardian to another boy. Not once. I asked for a copy of the file and drove home with Max still watching me, like he knew my mind was running wild. I parked in the driveway and just sat there for a while, staring at the house. What had Dad been hiding? Inside, I spread the document out on the dining table. Max laid his chin on my foot while I read. It confirmed everything. The transfer had been signed by both parents. Russell had been left in my dad's care for the summer while they worked out of state. He was supposed to go back home in August, but he never did. There was one more piece I hadn't noticed before. A note scribbled on the back of the paper, barely legible. "Check the crawl space behind the furnace." My breath caught. The furnace. I hadn't looked behind it. Not once. The basement felt colder than usual when I went down. Max didn't follow right away. He stopped at the top step, ears perked, then slowly padded down behind me. The furnace sat in the far corner, old and wheezing. It had been replaced once, but the metal housing hadn't changed much. I moved the paint cans and tools out of the way, then slid my fingers along the wall behind it. There was a seam in the paneling. Max started whining. I grabbed a screwdriver from the shelf and wedged it into the seam. The panel popped loose with a groan. Dust swirled up, and the smell hit me. Old, sour, and earthy. Inside was a narrow crawl space, not wide enough to stand in, just enough for someone to squeeze through. I took a deep breath and reached in with my flashlight. It wasn't long before I found it. A bundle of papers, old clothes, and something wrapped in plastic. I pulled it out slowly. The plastic was brittle with age. Inside were drawings, childish ones, crayons, stick figures. Some of them showed a boy and a man. One was labeled Me and Will. Max sat quietly, watching. There was more. A small notebook, filled with short entries. The writing was sloppy, probably Russell's. The last one read, "I don't like the dark. Will says it's safe in here. I don't think it is. I hear things. I think someone else is down here." My hands trembled. I took everything upstairs and laid it out on the dining table. I stared at it for a long time, trying to piece it together. Had Dad kept Russell here? Had he tried to protect him? Or was it something else? Something worse. I didn't want to believe it. Couldn't. That night, I barely slept. Max stayed close, never leaving my side. Around 2 a.m., he sat up and started barking, sharp and furious. I bolted upright. The sound was coming from the den. I rushed in and froze. The photo had fallen again, just like before. Max stood over it, growling low. I looked behind the frame. Nothing new, just the same wall. But then I noticed a faint scratch in the paint, like something had been dragged from behind the frame down toward the baseboard. I got the flashlight and followed the line. It led to the floor, then along the edge of the room to the hallway. Max stayed with me, tail stiff. The scratch ended at the hallway closet. I opened it and froze. The carpet inside was slightly torn, like someone had tried to pull it back. I peeled it up and found more scratches, not random ones. These were straight, methodical, like a path. Under the carpet was a wood panel. I pried it up and found a narrow shaft, almost like an old coal chute. It went straight down. To where, I didn't know. I shined the light in, but couldn't see the bottom. I lowered a small camera I had on a cord. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. The feed showed a tight space, maybe a few feet wide, with what looked like concrete walls. And in the far corner, something shiny. I retrieved the camera, backed away, and shut the closet. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I called Frank and told him I needed time off. No explanation. He didn't press. I spent the next few hours reading through Russell's notebook. It was mostly rambling, a kid's version of a diary, but one passage stuck with me. Will said I could stay if I wanted, said no one would come looking for me if I didn't want them to. He said I could have a fort. I think it's more like a cage. That word hit me like a brick. Max paced around the den again, then stopped suddenly and stared at the fireplace. I followed his gaze, looked again at the mismatched wood paneling. I tapped each board, listening for hollow sounds. There. The third one from the left. I pried it open with the crowbar. Behind it, insulation. I pulled it back, revealing more space. This one connected to the crawl space behind the wall, but extended farther than I realized. Max started growling again. I crawled in. It was tight, dusty, the air stale and thick. My flashlight flickered, then steadied. The narrow space curved, then dipped. At the end, I found a rusted metal door. It was locked with a padlock. I backed out, ran upstairs, and grabbed the key from the cigar box. It fit. The door creaked open into a hidden chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, old boxes, blankets, and a single cot. There were toys on the floor, books, some worn clothes, and on the wall, carved into the brick with what looked like a nail, Russell was here. I turned to Max, who had followed me in halfway. His ears twitched. He sniffed the air, then whined. I looked around again. This place had been hidden for decades. A secret someone had gone to great lengths to bury. And now, piece by piece, it was unraveling. I didn't say a word to anyone for 2 days. Not to Frank at the hardware store. Not to Deputy Sloan when he passed by and asked if everything was all right. Not even to the clerk at the gas station who always said hi when I bought coffee. I just nodded, paid, and left. Because I knew the second I opened my mouth, everything would spill out in a way that would sound like I'd lost it. Instead, I stayed home. I comb-tissued through every inch of that secret room behind the fireplace. I cataloged everything. 3 old blankets, 7 children's books, a tiny broken flashlight, 8 matchbox cars, 2 rusted canteens, and 4 empty tin cans of beans. There was even a calendar with all the days marked in shaky X's, up to what I guessed was the summer of 1975. Russell had been down there for over a year. Max wouldn't go in at first. He'd sniff the air, then back away. Not out of fear, I don't think. It was more like respect, like he knew something heavy had happened here. I spent most of my time rereading Russell's notebook. Some entries were simple, lists of things he missed, like apple pie and cartoons. Others were darker. Mentions of arguments, long silences, doors that opened and closed when no one was there. And then there was one passage that nearly made me drop the notebook. He said I wasn't supposed to tell. He said if I did, they'd come for me. So I stayed quiet. I stayed real quiet. But I hear them now. I don't think I'm alone. Max barked that afternoon when I pulled out the family albums. I hadn't looked through them in years. Most were dusty, tucked away in the attic where the insulation made your nose itch. I sat down on the living room floor, photo boxes scattered around me, and started flipping through old Polaroids. And there he was. Not labeled, not featured, but there, barely visible at the edge of a backyard photo from 1974. A boy in a striped shirt, watching from behind a tree. It wasn't me. I was in the front, grinning with a fishing rod. Max stared at the photo for a long time, then pawed at it once. I made copies of everything. Russell's notebook, the documents from the records office, the calendar, the photo, and stuffed them into a folder. I didn't know who I was going to give it to yet. Maybe the sheriff. Maybe someone higher up. But I needed someone else to see it, to prove this wasn't just in my head. Before I could do anything, the power went out again. It was around midnight. I'd just turned in. Max curled up at the foot of the bed. The lights flickered once, then died. Silence fell over the house like a blanket. No fridge hum. No clocks ticking. Then I heard it. A single, deliberate knock from somewhere below. Max stood up, hackles raised. I grabbed the flashlight. My hands were trembling. The knock came again. Slower this time, from the basement. I took the stairs one step at a time, heart pounding. Max stayed close behind me. The beam from my flashlight shook, casting shadows that danced across the walls. At the bottom of the stairs, I froze. The secret door behind the furnace was wide open. I hadn't left it that way. Inside, the small chamber was undisturbed, but the calendar was missing. I turned around fast, the light sweeping across the basement. Nothing. No footprints. No sound. Just Max's low growl. Back upstairs, I locked every door and window. Again. I checked the attic hatch, still closed. Max wouldn't leave my side. He followed me room to room until we ended up back in the den. I reached for the family photo out of habit, but when I touched the frame, it moved. Someone had loosened it. I took it down, flipped it over. Nothing inside. But behind the spot where it hung on the wall, there was now a fresh set of scratch marks. Deep, like fingernails or something metallic had dragged down the wall. Max whimpered. That was when I called the sheriff again. I had to. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy. They sent out 2 deputies this time. Sloan and another guy named Brady. They walked the perimeter, checked every room, listened to my story with polite disbelief. I'm telling you, I said, holding up the folder. There was a kid here. My dad was his guardian. He went missing. There's a whole hidden room under the house. Brady scratched his chin. You saying your old man kept him down there? No, I snapped, then softened. I don't know. Maybe he tried to protect him. Maybe something else happened. But there's too much stuff here to ignore. Sloan agreed to take the folder back with him. Promised to look into the case. I didn't expect much. 2 nights later, Max started scratching at the wall beside the staircase. I'd nearly fallen asleep on the couch when I heard it. I walked over to him and frowned. Again? What is it this time? He pawed frantically, nose pressed to the drywall. I tapped the spot. Hollow. I got the crowbar and flashlight and started tearing back the panel. Behind it wasn't a crawl space this time. It was a narrow corridor, built between the studs, barely 2 feet wide. Max didn't wait. He squeezed in ahead of me. I followed, the air growing colder the deeper we went. At the end, there was a trap door. This one led down, a metal ladder bolted into stone. We were under the foundation now. The chamber was different, dry but chilled, like the air hadn't moved in decades. There were more drawings here, on the walls, crude, childlike, stick figures, one larger than the others, red crayon, shaped like it had claws. He comes at night, was scrawled next to it. Max growled deep in his throat. I scanned the room. There were blankets, bones, animal, I hoped, and another notebook. Inside, the entries were shorter. Will told me to stay. I tried, but he went away. Now the red thing comes. It says I can't leave. I yelled for help. No one came. I think the walls eat sound. I miss the sun. And then, on the last page, someone's coming. I think it's Will. I hope it's Will. I sat down hard, the weight of it all settling on me. Had my dad locked Russell down here? Or had he built this as a refuge? Who was the red thing? Was it just a child's fear? Or something else? Max nudged my knee, then barked once. I heard it too. Above us. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. I turned off the flashlight. Sat in the dark with Max pressed against me, both of us holding our breath. And we waited. The footsteps faded slowly, like someone didn't want to be heard, but also didn't care enough to hide completely. Max kept still next to me, pressed close against my leg, his breathing slow and quiet, like he understood exactly what we were doing. I gripped the flashlight, but didn't dare switch it back on yet. We waited in that cold, hidden chamber beneath the house until the silence stretched so long, I thought I might be imagining the whole thing. Finally, I clicked the light back on. The walls didn't look any less eerie the second time. The red crayon drawings still stared back at me. Those stick figures, that tall shape with 2 long arms, and the words next to it. Something about the raw simplicity of it unsettled me more than 1,000 ghost stories ever could. Max sniffed the ground and started toward the ladder again. I followed him back up into the narrow corridor and carefully resealed the trap door behind us. Once we got out of that passageway and back into the main hallway of the house, I sat on the stairs and just breathed. My mind raced. Someone had been in the house. I was sure of it. The footsteps weren't a dream, and the missing calendar from the chamber wasn't something I could explain away. Someone wanted to remind me they were here, and that they still had the upper hand. The next morning, I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't want another visit with raised eyebrows and shallow sympathy. I wanted answers. I drove to the town library. Max stayed in the truck with the windows cracked, watching every passerby like they might be the threat we were chasing. Inside, I found the archive room and started digging into every newspaper I could get from the summer of 1974 to 1976. There it was, a tiny article buried in the back of the August 1974 edition of the county paper. Local boy missing. Search underway. It had Russell's name, his age, and a brief mention that he'd been staying with family friends on Cedar Lane. My street. I scanned ahead to the following months. Nothing. No follow-up. No updates. It was like the town had forgotten. Like Russell had just disappeared and everyone moved on. But then I saw something else. March 1975. An even smaller article. Authorities dismiss tip in missing boy case. It referenced an anonymous call that led deputies to an abandoned silo out by the quarry. Empty. No evidence. Case went cold again. I sat back in my chair. Someone had tried. Someone had still cared. Maybe even Russell himself. On the drive home, I took a detour out by the quarry. The silo was still there, overgrown with weeds, rusted, nearly shut. I parked and walked around the perimeter. The front door had been padlocked and broken open sometime years ago. Inside, the air was thick with mildew. No signs of anyone living there now. Just rot, metal, and silence. But someone had thought it was worth hiding something once. It made me wonder if Russell ever tried to escape. If maybe he'd made it out once, briefly. When I got home, Max was pacing the yard. His tail was stiff, his posture alert. I barely had the truck in park before he ran up to the front door and started barking. I sprinted after him. The front door was cracked open. I always locked it. I burst inside, heart in my throat. The living room looked normal. So did the kitchen. But then, I noticed it. One of the family photo frames had been turned face down. The one with just Dad and me, from the summer of 1974. Max growled, low and guttural. He bolted to the staircase and stopped in front of the hallway closet, the one with the chute underneath the floorboards. I opened it. The carpet had been peeled back again. The panel was gone. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it down. Nothing visible, just a drop into darkness. "Stay," I told Max, but he whined in protest. I climbed down the ladder slowly, one rung at a time. When I hit the bottom, I flicked the beam around. Everything looked as I left it. The small chamber, the cold air, the forgotten things, except the red crayon stick figure was now smeared, rubbed into the stone like someone had tried to erase it. I turned and found something new on the wall, scratched with a nail, barely legible. I tried to leave. I still hear him. A noise snapped from above. Max's barking. Frenzied. Wild. I raced up the ladder, stumbling through the corridor and into the hallway. Max was barking at the attic hatch. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time and pulled the string. The ladder unfolded and bounced off the floor. Max didn't wait. He darted up before I could say anything. I climbed after him. The attic was quiet. Too quiet. The smell returned. That faint, sour scent, like forgotten food and dust. In the corner, near the insulation, something glinted. A metal box. I opened it. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Polaroids. All of children. Most looked scared. Some were asleep. All were in this house. And near the bottom of the pile, I found one of myself, sleeping. As a child. Max growled behind me. I turned slowly. Footsteps in the walls. No, not footsteps. Scraping from behind the attic boards. I pressed my ear to the wall. A whisper. Just one word. Will. I fell back like I'd been struck. Max snarled. We got out of the attic fast. I locked the hatch behind us and didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I did what I should have done from the beginning. I packed every photo, every notebook, every object I found into boxes. I made 3 copies of the files. One for the sheriff, one for a lawyer I knew from town, and one that I locked in a safety deposit box. And I called someone who specialized in old homes, a guy who did structural assessments. There are things in my house that shouldn't be there, I told him. Hidden spaces. You think you could find every last one? He said it might take time. Good, I said. Bring a team. Bring whatever you need. Max sat beside me while I hung up. I looked around at the walls, the photos, the floors. Every creak now held a secret. And we were going to find every single one of them. The structural team showed up on a Wednesday morning, their white van rumbling into the driveway just as the sun finished rising over the tree line. There were 3 of them. Dan, the lead guy with a thick binder of blueprints under his arm. Matt, who looked like he could carry a furnace on one shoulder. And Rob, the quiet one with a camera always in hand. They introduced themselves quickly and got to work just as fast. I let them in, showed them where the wall panels had come loose, pointed out the hidden corridor by the staircase, the false chamber behind the fireplace, and the chute under the closet. Dan flipped open his binder and squinted at the pages. None of these compartments are in the original design, he said, but it looks like they were added during renovations sometime in the late 70s. Not professionally. These are custom jobs, built from the inside out. Max followed them from room to room like a supervisor, never barking, but keeping close. Dan patted him on the head absent-mindedly as he moved between blueprints and walls. We'll do thermal scans, Dan said. See if anything else is hiding between the walls. Won't take long. I nodded and poured coffee for all of us. While they worked, I sat in the den, flipping through Russell's drawings again. I kept thinking about the red figure, the one with the claws. It kept showing up, over and over. Sometimes it was watching from the corners. Sometimes it stood beside a smaller figure I could only assume was Russell. And once, in one of the more frantically drawn sketches, it towered above a bed, arms outstretched. I wanted to believe it was just the imagination of a frightened boy. But the house had its own way of making you doubt yourself. Around noon, Matt called me into the laundry room. We found something, he said. They had removed part of the drywall behind the water heater. Behind it was a small pocket space, no larger than a coffin. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were more old belongings. Clothing, a rusted locket, a spiral notebook. Rob took photos of everything before handing it over. I unfolded the notebook. This one was different. Written in a steadier hand. Adult handwriting. Page after page was filled with timelines, dates, food logs, notes about someone's behavior. July 8th, Subject asked about going home again. Changed the topic. August 3rd. Subject refuses to eat unless I'm present. Need to adjust lighting. Too dim. September 19th. Nightmares worsening. Claims to hear voices through the floor. No names were ever mentioned, but I didn't need them. It was my father's handwriting. I sat down hard on the floor. Dan knelt beside me. You okay, man? This is his journal. My dad's. He was documenting Russell like he was some sort of experiment. Dan glanced at the pages. This doesn't read like a regular kid watching arrangement. No, I whispered. It doesn't. Max nuzzled his head under my arm, grounding me. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. They found 2 more hidden spaces, one behind the kitchen cabinets, and another under the floorboards in what used to be my dad's study. Each space held remnants of a child's life. Broken toys, drawings, pages torn from books. One thing became clear. Russell had been moved around. Often. And not always by choice. By sunset, Dan pulled me aside. I've worked on old houses for over 20 years, he said, and I've never seen anything like this. Whoever built these passages knew the layout down to the studs. This wasn't just someone being paranoid. This was someone creating a network to hide something, or someone. Or themselves, I said. He nodded. We'll be back tomorrow. There's still more to check, especially in the attic. That night, I didn't bother turning on the TV or trying to sleep. I sat with Max on the couch, the journal on my lap, my father's words swimming in my head. Subject responded poorly to silence, began speaking to the walls. I listened once. I didn't like what I heard. What had he heard? I must have dozed off because I woke to Max growling. The hallway light was off. I didn't remember turning it off. I stood slowly, flashlight in hand. Max followed, every muscle tight. We crept toward the hallway. At first I didn't see it. Then I did. A smear of red crayon on the baseboard. A crude arrow, pointing toward the den. I followed it. Another arrow drawn across the floorboards, then another, leading behind the bookshelf. Max barked once, sharp and loud. I pulled the shelf away from the wall. Behind it was a hatch I'd never seen before. Small, square, with an old latch. I opened it and found a descending shaft, just wide enough to crawl through. The air that rose from it was cold. I stared into the blackness. Max whined, but didn't stop me as I slid inside. The tunnel curved sharply. The walls were made of wood planks, reinforced with iron nails. After what felt like 20 feet, it opened into a small chamber. And there he was. Not a person. A figure. Tall. Shaped in red. Not flesh, not shadow. Somewhere in between. No eyes, no mouth. Just presence. I froze. I couldn't move. Then it vanished, gone, like smoke. I scrambled out of the chamber, heart racing, dirt under my nails. Max barked and backed up as I crawled out of the hatch. I slammed it shut and pushed the bookshelf back into place. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Dan's team came back. I didn't tell them about the figure. Not yet. Instead, I asked Dan, is there any way this house could have hidden rooms that weren't built by hand? Like natural ones? Cavities from the original foundation? Yes, he thought for a second. Possible, especially if the house was built over uneven land. Why? Because I think there's still more. Places no blueprint could tell us about. He nodded. We'll bring in ground-penetrating radar. If there's something under this place, we'll find it. Max barked from the other room. I turned to see him staring at the fireplace again, waiting. The radar team arrived 2 days later with a van full of strange equipment and the kind of serious expressions that said they'd seen things most people wouldn't believe. Dan introduced them like he was handing off a baton. His crew had done what they could with the physical structure. Now, it was time to look beneath. The lead technician, a sharp-eyed woman named Carla, explained the process in plain, practiced words. "We'll map out everything below the foundation," she said, pointing to the schematic Dan had left behind. "If there are air pockets, tunnels, or voids that aren't on your blueprints, we'll see them. Might take all day. You should probably keep the dog out of the way." I tried to follow that advice, but Max had other plans. He was restless, more than I'd seen him since this whole thing started. He paced the living room, growled at the basement door, then darted back to the den and stared at the fireplace like he expected it to open on its own. Carla and her team started outside, dragging cables and sensors across the yard and porch, then moved into the crawl space and basement. I hovered nearby, not wanting to miss anything. They were scanning below the stairs when one of the monitors beeped. "There," Carla said, 4 feet under the southeast corner of the den. That's not part of the foundation cavity. It's its own sealed chamber." "How big?" I asked. "Not big," she replied. "Rough guess? Maybe the size of a closet. But it's got a defined border. Someone built it." Max barked at that exact moment. Loud, urgent. His tail was stiff, his ears forward, and he stood directly above the spot they were talking about. Carla raised an eyebrow. "He knows." "I told you," I said quietly. "He always does." They marked the floor with chalk, and I called a contractor I trusted to open the hardwood floor carefully. By evening, we had a 3-by-3-foot section removed, revealing a heavy square of concrete with a metal ring embedded in it. We stared at it. No one spoke. Dan finally said what everyone was thinking. "Why would anyone seal off a chamber under their den?" I knelt down and tugged at the ring. It groaned and lifted an inch. Dust swirled out. The smell hit us fast, stale, damp, old. I dropped it back. We decided to wait until morning to open it. The team wanted to prep lighting and safety gear. Carla wanted backup. I wanted daylight. That night, I didn't sleep. Max wouldn't leave the den. He lay right on top of the marked spot, growling at any creak in the floorboards. Around 3 in the morning, I dozed off in the armchair nearby. I woke to the sound of whispering. Not words, not English, just a rhythmic hiss of air shaped like language. I bolted upright. Max was already on his feet, hackles raised. The whispers stopped. I didn't move for the rest of the night. At sunrise, the team returned. They brought gloves, masks, 2 heavy-duty flashlights, and a compact winch. Carla positioned herself at the control panel, while Matt helped me lift the concrete hatch free. Beneath was a narrow tunnel descending into darkness. Stone walls. Damp air. Max growled. We lowered the lights in first. The space below was lined with shelves. Not books, boxes. Wooden, nailed shut, each stamped with symbols I didn't recognize. One corner had a small cot. Another had a pile of rags. I volunteered to go down. Carla hesitated, then handed me a harness. "If anything happens, we pull you out. No hero moves." I nodded. The descent wasn't long, maybe 10 feet. But every inch felt like 100. At the bottom, I turned slowly, beam sweeping across the chamber. The boxes were covered in dust, some stained with what looked like water or something darker. I pried one open. Inside were journals. Dozens of them. I opened the first. It wasn't my father's handwriting. It was older, precise. Latin phrases filled the margins. Names I didn't know. Drawings like the ones Russell had made. One phrase repeated often. Custos inter parietes. I didn't know Latin, but it chilled me anyway. Max barked above. I called up. "There's a body down here." The air thickened. No one moved. The figure in the corner wasn't just a pile of rags. It was bones, partially wrapped in what might have been a coat once. A child's coat. I backed away slowly, throat tight. They hauled me up fast. Carla called the sheriff. Again. And this time, he didn't doubt me. Deputy Sloan showed up an hour later with 2 other officers and a forensic team. They sealed the chamber and photographed everything. The journals, the boxes, the body. It would take weeks to analyze. I sat outside on the porch, Max lying at my feet. His eyes never left the house. When Sloan came out, his face was gray. "We'll get answers," he said. I wasn't sure I believed him, but I believed Max. That night, just after midnight, he sat up in bed and barked once, loud, defiant. I followed him downstairs. The den was quiet. The fireplace stood still. But the family photo, our photo, had fallen again. This time I left it on the floor. I didn't need it to remember anymore. I was living inside the memory now, and the house wasn't finished speaking. 2 days after they sealed the underground chamber, the house fell quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that didn't feel like peace, but like something holding its breath. Waiting. Watching. Even Max, usually alert to every creak and rustle, moved more slowly. He'd lie near the den, ears drooped slightly, head resting on his paws, eyes following invisible things. I tried to settle into a rhythm. I went back to the hardware store part-time. Frank kept asking if I was all right, and I kept saying yes. It was easier than explaining what had been unearthed beneath my house. What I'd seen. What Max had sensed long before I did. I spent evenings cataloging the journals from the chamber. The sheriff had allowed me to keep the ones not directly connected to the investigation, and I couldn't leave them untouched. They were old, some maybe 100 years or more. Most were written in Latin or half-legible cursive, but there were patterns, symbols, recurring words. I had someone from the local college translate the Latin phrases. Custos inter parietes. It meant the guardian between the walls. The entries referenced strange occurrences, whispers in the night, figures glimpsed in reflections, sudden illnesses after entering hidden rooms. They read like old folklore, warnings passed down under the guise of documentation. But one journal mentioned something new, something I hadn't seen before. "Do not awaken the silence. Once disturbed, it must be fed." I didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But I had a feeling I would soon. On the 4th night, the den grew cold. Not just chilly, but cold, like the kind that comes from a long-forgotten cellar. I checked the thermostat, still set to 72. The vents were clear. Everything should have been normal. Max stood in the doorway and refused to enter. That was when I heard the humming. Faint. Childlike. A tune I didn't recognize. It echoed softly, like it came from behind the walls. I pressed my ear to the paneling. The sound was definitely inside. I grabbed my crowbar. Max barked once but didn't try to stop me. I removed the panel above the baseboard near the fireplace, expecting insulation or framing. What I found instead was a tunnel. New. Narrow. No dust. No cobwebs. And a red crayon mark along the top beam. I stared at it for a long time before crawling in. The tunnel ran maybe 10 feet, then dropped suddenly. I stopped at the edge and shined my flashlight down. It was a room. Rough stone. No floorboards. A single, low-ceiling light that flickered. Somehow wired, though I had no idea how. I climbed down and found something waiting. A chair. And in the chair, a cassette player. There was a single tape inside, labeled R.H. Russell Hayes. I pressed play. There was static at first, then a voice. Day 14. It's cold. I hear him at night. Will says it's just a dream, but I know better. The Guardian doesn't like noise. He doesn't like questions. He watches. He waits. He hates the light. My hand trembled. Max barked up above, frantic. I stuffed the player into my backpack and scrambled out of the tunnel. Back in the den, Max was running in circles, nose to the ground. He stopped at the hallway closet and barked straight at the wall. I opened the closet. The carpet had peeled up again. There was another red arrow drawn on the wood. I followed it to the attic. Everything felt slower, heavier, like walking underwater. I pulled the ladder down, climbed up, and found the attic stifling. Not with heat, but with presence. Another tape sat on the rafters, labeled W.T. Will Tucker, my dad. I took it, brought both tapes to the den, and set them beside the journals. Max stood guard while I played the second. Day 61. I'm trying to keep him calm. He talks to the walls now. Says the red man told him secrets. I think it's trauma, but sometimes I hear the whispers too. I've stopped sleeping. Something is watching us. I don't know who's the prisoner anymore. I shut the player off. Max and I didn't move for hours. That night, I had a dream. I was in the crawl space behind the fireplace. It kept going and going, endlessly twisting. The walls began to pulse, like breathing. And then I saw a figure ahead. Tall. Shadowed. Arms too long. No face. It held something out. A photo. My photo. I woke, drenched in sweat. Max standing beside the bed, growling. I sat up, looked toward the hall. The attic hatch was open again. I climbed up slowly, flashlight in one hand. The attic had changed. The photos from before were gone. In their place were new ones, recent. Printed from my own printer. Max and I sleeping, me reading the journals, him barking at the closet. I staggered back, dropped the flashlight. It clattered and spun before settling. Then I saw it, etched into the wood beam above me. Do not awaken the silence. I fled the attic. I stayed awake until morning, scribbling notes, copying files, whispering reassurances to Max. Whatever lived in this house, whatever had been buried for decades, was awake now. And it knew my name. I started boarding up the attic hatch the same morning I found the new photographs. I didn't care if it looked paranoid. I bolted a solid oak plank across the frame and secured it with 3-inch screws. Max sat by the door and didn't blink the whole time I worked. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. But I could tell he hated that I was up there at all. Every minute I stayed in the attic made his eyes more desperate. Afterward, I took down every single photo on the walls. Not just the family ones. All of them. I couldn't look at a single frame without wondering who or what might be behind it. The den, once a cozy place of memories, now looked like a stripped-down waiting room. I left the fireplace alone. I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. Max still stared at it sometimes, but less often now. Like even he was growing tired of the signals the house kept sending. That afternoon, I got a call from Deputy Sloan. We're confirming the remains were human. Juvenile, Time of death roughly mid-1970s. We're working to extract DNA. If it matches the Hayes family, we'll notify next of kin." "That won't bring him back?" I said, barely hearing myself. "No, but it closes a case we forgot to carry." I asked him if he knew who had access to the missing persons files in the early 80s. "You think someone buried the case?" he asked. "I think someone tried to erase it." There was a pause. Then Sloan said, "We'll look into it, but you might not like what we find." After we hung up, I went to the garage. I pulled out the remaining items I hadn't touched since Dad passed. Boxes labeled workshop, office, old plans. They smelled like cedar and metal and time. I found 2 sketchbooks. Not blueprints, not construction designs. These were hand-drawn maps. Of the house. Not just the house I knew, but other versions of it. Drafts that showed hidden corridors, false walls, secret staircases. Every version had a room labeled differently. One called it Sanctuary, another called it the Listening Room, and one simply called it RH. In the margins, my father had scribbled phrases. "Light draws it. Silence feeds it. Don't look when it's behind the glass." I dropped the sketchbook. Max whined softly and pushed his nose into my hand. That night, I played both tapes again. First Russell's, then my dad's. I tried to catch things I might have missed before. This time, I heard it. In the background, beneath the static and breathing, a whisper. Faint. Layered. As if recorded over multiple times. I isolated the audio using an app and slowed it down. The phrase repeated twice. "Let me in." The hair on my arms rose. Max barked at the laptop. He'd never done that before. I shut it, unplugged everything, and carried it to the shed out back. I didn't destroy it. I wasn't ready to let go, but I couldn't keep it near me anymore. Around midnight, I heard scraping again. Not inside the walls. Outside the house. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. But Max ran to the back door and growled so deep I felt it in my chest. I opened it and stepped onto the porch. No wind, no birds, no sound. Then, on the side of the house, I saw it. A symbol. Drawn in red. Crayon. A crude figure with arms that stretched to the edges of the wall. Head tilted sideways. No face. I backed away, closed the door, locked every bolt. The next morning, it was gone. Just like the marks in the den, just like the photo changes, just like everything else, I started a log, a journal. Every sound, every cold spot, every flickering light. I wrote down times, temperatures, even weather conditions. I had to make sense of it. I had to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. Max stayed close. He didn't bark as much anymore. Just watched. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he'd stand at the edge of the bed and look straight up, at the ceiling, at the attic. I started dreaming in Latin. Not full sentences, just words. Custos. Vigilia. Silentium. I woke one morning with blood on my fingertips. Not a wound. Just smeared across the pads like I'd touched something. The mirror in the hallway had a single word on it. Remember. Max refused to go near it. By the end of the week, I decided to leave the house. Not permanently, just for a few days. I packed a bag, filled Max's travel crate, locked up the journals in a fireproof box, and booked a room at a cabin 2 towns over. But when I went to start the car, the engine turned over twice and died. The dashboard flickered. The radio screamed static. Max barked and ran back into the house. I followed him. The fireplace was lit. I hadn't touched it. Flames licked at nothing. No logs, no gas, just heat and dancing light. Then the crackle changed. It became a voice. "Stay!" I shut off the breakers to the whole house. The fire didn't stop. I threw water on it. It hissed, went out. The room smelled like sulfur and rain. Max sat down in front of it, looked at me, waited. I sat beside him. We stayed there until morning. I didn't leave the house. I couldn't. It wasn't finished with me. And it had something left to show. Max knew before I did. The house had changed again. It was subtle at first. Shadows in the corners that lingered too long. Reflections that didn't quite match up when I glanced in the hallway mirror. The fireplace, after that last strange flame, stayed cold, but it had a presence now. I could feel it when I walked past, like the heat from a turned-off oven that shouldn't still be warm. I could feel it watching. And Max, he never took his eyes off it anymore. It had been 10 days since I tried to leave. 10 days since the engine failed. The mirror bled words. The fire hissed, "Stay." I gave in. I stopped fighting it. I didn't unpack my bag, but I stopped planning to leave. Instead, I read. Every journal. Every note my father ever scribbled. I cross-referenced them with Russell's entries, with the Latin phrases I found scattered in the attic, and I began to build a timeline. One that didn't make logical sense, but it fit in a way nightmares fit. Not real, but still true. Russell hadn't been the first. He wasn't even the second. This house had been built over something older. Not a grave, not a sacred site. Something nameless. A place where silence could gather. Where echoes turned inward. My family, through generations, had tried to contain it. Not destroy it, just contain it. And somewhere along the line, my father lost control. The symbols in the journals were repeated in 3 places throughout the house, under the staircase, behind the kitchen cabinets, and in the den under the fireplace. I drew them out, traced them, and placed them where they were once carved. I followed instructions I barely understood, but couldn't ignore. Max watched me work like he was afraid I might disappear. On the night I finished the 3rd symbol, everything stopped. The scratching, the voices, the cold. For the first time in weeks, the house went still. I slept. A full night. No dreams. But Max didn't sleep. The next morning, I woke up to find him sitting in front of the fireplace again, stiff, ears forward, like a statue. I sat beside him, laid a hand on his back. "I think we're close," I whispered. "But I don't know what comes next." That's when the doorbell rang. It hadn't rung in over a year. Max bolted to the front hall. I followed, heart pounding. Standing on the porch was an older man. Thin, long face, wearing a tan jacket and a dusty green cap. He looked down at Max through the glass and smiled. He waved at me. I opened the door slowly. "Name's Grant Hayes," he said. "Russell was my uncle." I couldn't breathe. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I got this in the mail 3 days ago," he said. "No return address. Just my name and this photo." He handed it to me. It was the photograph of the fireplace, with Russell's name scratched into the stone. "I grew up hearing whispers about this place," he said. "My dad wouldn't talk about it. He always said, 'Russell's ghost lives behind those walls.' We thought it was just grief. But then I saw your name come up in the reopened case." I invited him in. He stayed for hours. We sat at the kitchen table and went through everything together. Journals, drawings, audio tapes, photographs. He never once flinched, like he'd been waiting his whole life to see these things. Before he left, he said, "There's a way to finish this. Russell's story can end, but something else is trapped here, something older. If you leave it sealed, it'll just wait, just like before." "What do I do?" He looked at Max, then at me. "You open it. All the way. You let it out. But you don't run. You listen. You let it speak. That's all it ever wanted. To be remembered." He didn't explain how he knew that. He just left. That night I sat by the fireplace and waited. Max sat beside me. Around 3 in the morning, the wall behind the fireplace cracked. Not crumbled. Cracked like it split along a line that had always been there. A section of the brick folded back like a door. Behind it, a tunnel. Not one I'd seen before. Max stood, looked at me, then walked in. I followed. It was colder than I expected. The air didn't move. The walls were smooth. Too smooth, like someone had carved them with tools that didn't belong in this century. At the end, we entered a chamber. Circular. Stone. Symbols lined the walls, all glowing faintly. In the center sat a chair. Russell was in it. No bones. Just light. A boy-shaped shimmer of light, not breathing, not blinking. He looked at me, or through me. Then he opened his mouth. No sound came out. But I heard it. All of it. His loneliness. His fear. The years. The silence. He hadn't been killed. He'd been absorbed into the house, into the thing beneath it. His memory had kept the place alive, and now he wanted peace. I stepped forward. Max did too. Russell's form shimmered. He raised one hand, pointed to the wall. I walked over. There was another drawing. Of Max. In red crayon. And a word beside it. Guide. When I turned around, Russell was gone. So was the chair. The chamber began to fade. Not collapse, just fade. Like mist in the morning. Max and I walked out of the tunnel. When we reached the den again, the fireplace was sealed. Smooth brick. No seams, it never opened again. The house returned to normal. No sounds, no whispers, no red marks, just wood and stone and air. I wrote everything down. I mailed a copy to Grant Hayes. The sheriff closed the case a week later. They called it a tragic accident, a forgotten child in an era where records failed. But I knew. Max knew. Russell wasn't forgotten anymore. He'd been heard. And the house, whatever it had been, had let go. Max sleeps peacefully now. No pacing, no growling. Sometimes, late at night, he lifts his head and looks toward the fireplace. But he doesn't bark. He listens. And so do I.